aggressively.
Control J
four,
track is not
three,
working for me.
2, 1.
I love how silent the birthday hat is just going to become like
I can be uploaded
part of your
without that.
design. Yeah, I like it. It's charming that you probably want to make like a separate item. I'll ask Scold if she's okay with making
Well, I can't scale
standalone
bones.
item.
So, well, could I
Actually, I should
scale it
ask.
before uploading, or would I just have to remove it from the model?
I think.
Should we just get started, Brad?
Actually,
Sure.
Anyway, this is
oh
how
yeah,
I'm gonna leave for this meeting.
scale it.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are. Just so you guys know, Kayla is recording our meeting today, so we will post that after the meeting. If anybody would like to reference it or share it with others who couldn't make it today, we thought we'd try a different time zone to allow some folks who aren't able to attend afternoon Pacific time meetings. So our agenda today, I think Brad's going to go through some of the PRs that have been submitted, and then we are going to walk through some of the open source proposals that have come through. As far as a couple quick housekeeping reminders, if you aren't talking, could you please make sure to mute your mic so we don't have distracting side conversations or typing from whoever's talking? That would be super helpful. And I think that's.
Oh, did we just lose you, Ashley? Oh no. Sadness. Well, I'll go ahead and get started. Can you guys all hear me okay?
Yes. I can
Okay,
hear you.
cool.
Yep.
I'm sure Ashley will be back in just a second. So one thing you'll all notice if you go look at the pull requests, I've added a new tag that I'm going to use to try to help us go through the open source stuff. So there's a new tag that we've added to all the PRs that are community submitted open source PRs, which is open source. Maybe I might change that to say community submitted or something like that. But basically, you all get the idea. So it looks like there's 5 PRs that are up there right now. Um, One of them, most of them are from Sarensen 1, and then we have one from a developer who I don't believe is here, Orn 1. Um, the It looks like, and I know we chatted about this last meeting, so it looks like there's still on Sarensen's PRs, there's still some feedback, and we're waiting to have you address that.
Yeah, most of those are just like a lot of those are holdovers from the last meeting. I've just haven't had time to deal with these ones.
Cool.
There's also a bunch of stuff I talked about that I was working on that's still like I have actually started experimenting with it, but I've not made PRs for them yet.
Cool. Cool. Well, I didn't want to. I'm not trying. I'm definitely not trying to pressure you to move faster on those things. But I do. I just wanted to make sure that if you had any questions about the feedback we left, or if there was anything.
No. I'm fine. I've read through it. It's okay. Oh wait, did everyone? Oh.
I'm.
Oh.
Yep.
I think he died.
Kind of swap places.
Brad crashed. Oh, now he's disconnected.
Yeah, I think something's going on with my network here. I apologize. That was just a disconnection. Good news is I know that we're making good progress on that in the dev builds. So, uh, anyway. So I did see, Sarensen, that you put another PR up there for some improvements to the Unity tool.
Mm-hmm.
And those look those look great.
There's the one I actually the next thing I am actually planning on bringing up, and I assume you'll be all right with this, is I wanted to add UI for like auto mapping the base mappings so that people don't have to edit the text file manually. That'd be pretty helpful. That's being worked on right now.
So so can you describe? Did you write that up, by the way, as an item on Canny, or did you?
No, I don't think I have yet, but it's again, I'll just once it's nearly done, so you probably have to take a look at it. It literally will just have the menu that will allow you to set the items yourself, so that you won't have to like actually manually edit the blend shapes in the text file, so you can have blinking and eye movement and stuff like
Cool.
that.
That sounds great. That sounds fantastic.
Y-
Cool. Well, as far as your all the open PRs there, so it sounds like the ball's in your court on a couple of them. On the avatar importer improvements, the ball's in our court to get a code review and then get it merged. And I don't see any red flags in that that would make it slow on our side. So we'll try to get that merged.
Should I maybe mark that as DNM at the moment, since there are probably other things that I'm planning to put into that PR, and it might be easier for you to code review it all in one go because.
That's up to you. If you feel like you'd rather make some other changes, then you could.
I just mean, well, I'm more curious about from your perspective, what's easier from a QA standpoint, rather.
Pondering that. I think that probably if you wanted to make a bunch more changes, then yeah, maybe uh, let's either tag that as not yet ready, or you could close it and open it again when you have a more complete thing. This doesn't because it's part of the Unity exporter. It's not like you're actually getting it doesn't do a build system. Like when you're changing when you're changing interface, you get the automatic build, and so it kind of gives you an opportunity to test what that would look like off of our build system. In this particular case, there's not a ton of benefit in having it open if you're going to make major changes to it. So I would say you maybe want to close it and reopen it when you have the more kind of complete thing.
Okay.
Or leave it open, and when we get around to it, we'll check it out and merge it. It's really six one way, half dozen the other. I'm not too stressed out about it being open, and I'm also not. But if you feel like
from my perspective, those particular changes are not something that I'm like super pedantic on getting them into the mainline engine at the moment, because I'm mostly passing that specific tool around to like specific people that I know who I know it's helpful to. In fact, that's something I kind of noticed. That is a really good tool that you guys made, but like nobody knows about it. Like it's hidden like pretty deeply. If it were up to me, that would probably be advertised like as the first thing that you have when you download the interface.
You mean the avatar exporter for Unity?
Yeah, that was actually a really good tool. Seriously, but I know I've been making changes to fix little things with it.
It's in the.
It's really good.
That's interesting feedback. We do have it in the documentation on how to make an avatar. That's where we thought people would find it first, and that's where we thought that it would be easiest for people to understand how to use it and download it and use it, right? Like so I think it's good feedback that you feel like it's more buried than it should be. We felt that I guess Ashley, we could take that as a piece of feedback about how would we position the
yeah, totally. It's great.
the avatar
It
tool.
might be buried mainly relative to the kind of audience I'm trying to appeal to, but I don't know. It might be a prioritization thing. I don't know. But it's from my perspective, I've noticed most people don't talk about it. Even regular users of the platform don't really talk that much about that tool, even though it
Saracen,
is
can you
very
can you
impressive.
expand on the audience you're trying to reach piece?
Mostly just mostly VR chat users who are very familiar with Unity and have like hundreds and hundreds of avatars that like that tool like makes it really really easy to bring over here.
And you're trying to reach them because
Because I want them over here.
A lot of them are
Got
content
it.
creators.
Yeah. Oh, exactly.
Right. So in other words, what I'm hearing you say, Sorensen, is just that we have a very powerful tool that would be
Yes.
attractive to people who are building custom avatars, who maybe have existing custom avatars that they've built in Unity, and the tool works very well for getting
it is
those.
a really good tool, yes.
And the tool works really well for. Thank you very much for saying that. I know the team that worked on it will appreciate that feedback. That tool is actually quite useful and achieves solves a pain point that these particular users have, but they may not be finding it and noticing it.
Yeah, it's just it's just one of those little things that like it feels like a marketing problem in a sense. I don't know.
Well,
And
there you
thanks
go, Ashley.
I've got my work to do.
I'm,
Thank you.
I'm sorry, but
No, don't be. We're just playing. Don't worry, don't be. No, it's good feedback. I appreciate it. And the reason I was not just asking, I assumed you were talking about VR chat users. What I was really kind of asking is like, is there something in particular? Like, what are you trying to to do for that audience, or is it just purely attracting
well,
friends coming over?
well, mostly that I know that people feel a lot more keen to come out and try other things if they feel they can bring their avatars with them.
Sure.
Because I think you've probably seen this. People feel very attached to their avatars, even if it's not
Absolutely.
something they created. As long as they can bring something over and
Be
have some form of
themselves that
identity,
represents them.
they
Yep,
feel more comfortable. It's like it's like a warm, familiar comfort blanket.
for sure.
Totally.
No, that's great.
Yeah, so we'll take a look at that, Saracen. That's good feedback about getting access to that tool more apparently. So cool. Well, with that in mind, so what we were thinking, we want to try to get the format of these meetings to be start with hitting all of the open source PRs and kind of walk through them. If the authors here make sure that any feedback that the development team has left, there's an opportunity to answer it. Maybe do fine tuning on kind of having a voice-based conversation on the PRs. I think that we can officially say we've checked that agenda item off, Ashley, for
Sounds like
today's
Yeah.
meeting. And then I think the next thing we want to do is we'll turn to the open source the roadmap open source proposals project, and we'll kind of go ahead and go top down based on top votes, and we will walk through them and just kind of have a conversation about those. So the first one is this entity filter scripts improvements. Is Menethol is Menethol here? I don't see him.
Also, just a reminder, you guys, if anybody dropped in late, we are recording and we will post the video, so folks that didn't make it will get to see this. I don't see Menethol though.
Yeah, I think that
Do we audio? Oh, he crashed again.
Oop, disconnect. Hopefully, just a disconnect.
I had a few people disconnect right there. Hopefully they come back.
Let's see. While we're waiting for Brad to come back, I know Humble Tim, you upvoted this. Marcus did. Tim Rag.
Will there be an opportunity to maybe discuss some of the ideas that may not have been written down yet after we've gone through the ones that people have written up?
For sure. I don't see why not. Time permitting. Happy to.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh my goodness. You know what, Ashley?
What's up?
I feel like we've been using our dev build so much lately. Like, I forgot how unstable the stable build is. Good news. Good news. The latest dev builds are much more stable than this build. So I'm sorry I crashed. I was in the middle of a very thoughtful point. I think we were looking
Always.
at least in my own mind. So anyway, I was saying that since Menethol is not here, does any? I saw that Humble Tim, you upvoted Menethol's project
Hmm.
idea. Do you have has anybody here talked to Menethol enough to feel like they can kind of articulate uh, more about this particular idea? In particular, in particular, I asked the question a bit back about like what are the types of things that the current filter system doesn't allow you to do that this particular proposal would be doing. Does anybody feel comfortable kind of riffing on that, or should we just go to the next item?
Well, I mean, I haven't, I'm not sure I understand his entire vision, but it seems like a big part of it is being able to uh, stretch out to the surface later on an administrative panel that doesn't require coding skills in order to configure, and to tie it into an authentication system that's also external. And I
I,
think you commented on that as well. So I'm not sure if that aspect of it is something that you guys may already be working on as part of the team stuff, or um, like where that might fit in. Oh, hello?
Oh, I'm listening. I'm reading. I'm pondering what you just said and
Okay, cool, cool.
reading his words to see how that relates. I mean, I think,
mm,
I mean, I guess the thing I'd say is so again in the spirit of like these are open source projects. Um, um, we've talked a lot about how do you have content? How do you create rules around content that mm, that allow the content to be dynamic but still allow it to be kind of uh, controlled how it's dynamic. So that's the spirit behind locked entities and entity filters, right? Locked entities, you can't change anything about them. Entity filters, everything else, you can change everything, and then entity filters let you control that. I would say the first, if somebody wanted to open up a PR tomorrow that implemented per entity filters. So right now, the way the entity filters works is there's one that runs across all edits across the domain. That's like a single script that kind of controls everything in the domain. And then a second feature we have is you can put an entity filter on a zone, and then all objects in that zone are enforced against that filter. And these two things are additive. If someone was to, the thing that we've been wanting to add for a while, but we haven't gotten around to it yet, is per entity filters. So basically, you'd make an object, let's say it's a bouncing ball, and then you would just use the physics aspects of it, but you could attach a filter to it that says, this ball can only bounce at this speed, and it can only go this far away, and maybe something else, and then the individual object, you can kind of control the filters of the individual object. That's the next feature that we planned to add to entity filters. And so that's a project that if somebody wanted to take on, it would be pretty straightforward. Um, I actually think the team could get that. Any one of you as an open source developer could crank that out pretty easily. Um, it's probably not that much code, and it would be something that we'd love. So that's kind of what I'd say is the next phase on that. We've avoided a user interface style approach because what we discovered is that the user interface would be massive. There'd basically be some kind of a checkbox, some kind of a range control for every single property of the object, and we felt that sure it's not programming, but it's not any less complicated than programming. So I guess if somebody put together a prototype where they um, kind of did some design work around that and showed us how that might be simpler, then we're certainly intrigued by the idea of a non-programming way of doing filters. Um, so that's probably another idea there that we'd be interested in seeing a pull request from.
I'm curious, for the per entity, would that be something like an additional like script filter property on the
Mm-hmm.
entity?
Yeah,
Okay,
so add a new property to the entity called, you know, uh, edit filter, URL or something like that, edit filter, and then we would basically, the entity server would load it when it loads entities, and then it would enforce changes on that entity against that filter, just like it does for zones today.
All right. Yeah, I think there might actually be a way to bridge that with what Menethil was thinking. If that property itself could be backed by a more complex scheme to change that property, then that could take long. That wouldn't have to be real time. That could kind of be like, an initial kind of administrative phase, and then it would deploy that to the entities to kind of secure them in whatever way was administered. Um, I could see that working with what he's proposing
I,
with some of the tokens.
Yeah, I mean, I have to admit, it would be awesome if next time, if maybe if you guys could encourage Menethol to come to the next meeting to
I
talk a little bit more about his idea, because
I
I don't
think I
understand.
might be able to articulate a bit of what he was going for. I don't want to mangle his words, but I think I could maybe explain it, what I think he was intending. Do you want me to?
Sure, absolutely, because I'm a little bit befuddled by his proposal. So
So I think what he was trying to get to was like a communication protocol between the entity filter system and the wider assignment client, and he was basing that on the desire to kind of introduce essentially a persistent ownership model to entities. So the idea that so right now, I think you can check the last edited by field to kind of get a sense of who actually who created an entity or who requested an entity to be created. But there's no element of persistence to that, and there's no really way of I don't think filters can actually like discriminate against who should be allowed to edit what. It can only choose like who because there's no sort of way to actually talk to the system outside of the filters as far as I can get at, and that's kind of what I think he wanted. He wanted some way for entity filters to talk to the assignment client so he could get information about like the users on the servers and get records and things like that, so that he could build more robust and hierarchical filters. That's what I think he wanted anyway.
I think I understood that that was what he was proposing. What I'm unclear on is um, the types of applications that require that.
I think he's talking about shared building and the idea that, well, if I make an object, I don't want I don't want I want to be have the authority to edit it, but I don't want other random people to be able to edit my object. So the idea that you could have shared sandboxes, I think that's what he wanted really.
Hmm.
All right. Well, maybe we can try to ask him one more time, Brad, and if he
Yeah.
doesn't chime in, we can.
Well, or yeah, I mean, it'd be awesome if um, encourage him to come to the next meeting and we could have a deeper conversation with him about it. Cool. Well, I guess with that in mind, we can move to the next highest item, which is open source mod kit by RevoFire. Looks like several of you voted this up as well. Is RevoFire here?
She wasn't able to make it today, but I can attempt to speak to it. I was
Sure,
working with her on kind of the architecture.
go for it.
All right. Well, it's kind of a response to observing a lot of people who want to participate but struggle to get involved because of some of the initial hurdles, and then the later hurdles in finding inroads into the PR system and alongside sharing what you've built. And so this kind of breaks that problem apart so that so it keeps the concerns separate. For example, high fidelity, with the stock build, might focus on stability and runtime performance, whereas out in the field with open source collaboration and experimentation, it might be a lot more bleeding edge where, the focus might be on flexibility and rapid prototyping. And so this splits those sides apart, and in the middle puts an open source SDK concept where it would be the bridge between those. So there would be a built-in component which would follow the standard plugin architecture that's already there, and that would basically provide hook points via the SDK for a simpler kind of additional extension to be then used. And one of the key ideas I think is a master control valve that could be off by default. So somewhere in the settings there would be a checkbox that says enable external modkit plugins. And if that wasn't checked, then this would have no impact at all on anything at runtime. If it was checked, it would then optionally scan for and include third-party extensions that the user could choose to install. Did that make sense?
Sure. So the way that you could, so so I think it sounds like, so here's what I'm hearing as the PR that would come in from RevoFire and you, Tim, as you work on this is, um, what I think you're saying is that we already have a plugin architecture, so maybe adjusting that plugin architecture to have a user interface that lets you kind of say include third-party plugins, maybe some similar to kind of the way that Chrome lets you drop in extensions and stuff like that. Some kind of an access to our, to a hosted repo of mod kits, um, and then uh, those places that you want to make additional enhancements. Like for example, I know there's I think you put up the proposal for adding back the script editor.
Mm-hmm.
That I think is a great example of something that you could you could make a plugin which is the script editor.
Exactly.
And that sounds great. I'd love it. Cool. Open a PR for that. We would love to see that PR.
Okay. Just to be clear, the SDK layer, one of the benefits it's designed to offer is, basically, if you've seen some of the way things like Leap Motion or even Oculus integrate, they give you basically a zip file that contains a header, a library to link against, and you don't really need, by design, there's very little external dependencies on top of that. And that's something that the middle layer would try to offer to make it simpler for people to create these kind of plugins.
Yeah, I get that. I think that
Okay.
the first cut at that. I mean, um, you know, it is the case that to build a new controller plugin, one way to do that is to download our whole repo,
Mm-hmm.
get our build system up and running, copy one of the existing input plugins, and build it from there. But you don't have to do that to make a Space Mouse plugin. You could use your own entire, you could come up with your own build system to build a Space Mouse plugin, and so long as it implements the controller plugin input plugin .h abstract base class, and it produces a DLL on Windows that you drop into the plugins directory, the client will happily honor that. So yeah, I think that's a great idea. If as part of that as part of this PR, or this project, you're saying like we're going to make a separate we'll submit a sort of a separate repo that includes docs, the raw header file, and a simplified Visual Studio project for a basic plugin. I think that's great. That's totally a straightforward project for someone to work on and love it.
Oh,
Awesome.
cool.
Let's do it. Go for it. I
All
await
right.
the PR.
So many green lights. Yay!
Um, light bulb demo. Is Bill here?
He was here.
Hey,
He's
There he
cool.
is.
behind chaos. He's hiding behind chaos.
Come on up, Bill.
That's okay. You want to talk a little bit about your project? What is the That's a great question. So this maybe does dovetail a little bit into the mod kit idea. So, um, can you just clarify? Did you build a plugin or did you build JavaScript or what is it that you? Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm kind of open to hearing what, as a group, you all think is the best way for us to handle this. One of the things that it's, admittedly, our build system is, it's large and it's complicated, and it takes a while to kind of get the whole thing downloaded and then built. It, but of course, one of the advantages of it is that if one writes their code in a consistent cross-platform way, mostly using the libraries that we've built as part of our shared library system, um, then you get uh, you practically get Mac, Windows, Unix, and Android support for free. And so one of the things that I think I scratch my head about, and again, I'm open to your thoughts as a community about when you'd want this versus when you wouldn't, is that if we were to make a repository that, for example, didn't depend on the larger build system, didn't depend on the libraries, it has the advantage that Tim articulated and Revo1 articulated in their mod kit proposal, um, uh, of being lighter weight and you know not dependent on the platform. That's a great advantage of that approach. The downside of it is that then the plugin, without a lot of extra work by the developer, probably only runs on one platform and probably doesn't necessarily automatically uh, work on all the different other platforms. So um, I don't know what you as a community feel like the pros and cons of that are. If you, Bill, want to, if you wanted to, you could um, open up a pull request against the uh, I'm looking at the code now. Like, yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. There's not really a great place in the interface code base to put a generic plugin. I mean, you could put if your light thing is a plugin, right? You certainly could put it in the plugins directory. Um, Okay, well, I guess I'll certainly chat with the team a little bit about how we might be able to do that, and I'm open to other suggestions. I think that to me that's the crux of this comes down to um, we could certainly make a new repo that just runs our build system, runs through a bunch of subdirectories, and builds the code just like the plugins. But then it's assumed that everything that's in those plugins is independent of anything else. If that's useful, I think that's something we could certainly do, and that might be a place that people could put open source plugins like the ones that we're talking about with ModKit or Bill's Light plugin.
Well, just to mention, one of the one of the nuances about plugin development, observing people attempting it over the last year or two, is that it's not really the known changes that cause problems. Like you guys added a version indicator in the plugin JSON file kind of spontaneously, and that intentionally broke compatibility, backwards compatibility,
Yep.
to prevent crashes. And that made sense, but it meant that anyone who had a working plugin yesterday, suddenly it wasn't working and it wasn't clear why. And so then they had to work backwards and figure that out. And then with the Space Mouse plugin, I think you might have been aware of that too, that the Space Mouse plugin like ended up crashing the next build accidentally because of the binary incompatibility, I guess.
ABI needs to be made more
Yeah. So
forward compatible.
so one of the reasons to have the SDK kind of live in full on parallel, which does mean there would be like there'd be a maintenance aspect to produce like a compatible library and header file every so often, is to
Mm-hmm.
protect the
Sure,
plugin
totally.
contributors against that, and to
Yeah.
also polyfill over anywhere that's possible. So if it were possible to fudge that version indicator to keep working plugins working, then that middle SDK layer could just have offered that, so that all Marcus has to do is recompile. He doesn't have to reverse engineer or anything. It brings all
No,
of
I
that
get it. I get it.
together.
I
Okay.
totally get it. I get it.
Okay.
Um, I totally get it. I agree with you. And obviously, as we're we like the idea. So I mean, I think that basically the way to start that out is that, like I said, with the ModKit proposal, if we got a pull request from you, Tim, or from Revo Fire or anybody
Hmm.
else on um, beginning that process, I think we would be very supportive of that.
Okay, cool.
And
And
your basic point of you know uh, essentially firewalling off or isolating off the official public interface for plugins is exactly the right approach to move forward on that. So more green
yeah,
lights.
okay. And Bill, if you want to get together afterwards, we could talk about, like, it would be great to have a couple, real world plugin examples like your light bulb that we can see if they make sure they fit, and then maybe even have those be kind of like an initial example even. Hmm. Cool.
Cool. The next project that was upvoted was the physical Bluetooth keyboard integration um, using the Vive tracker. Um, is Will here?
Oh, that's
I don't
actually
think so.
interesting.
I don't think Will's
No,
here.
Philip had a lot of comments on that as well.
Yeah.
Just to mention, I'm not sure how many people realized it was today. I actually thought the meeting was yesterday. So I don't know if that's something, maybe you could do a tweet or something next time in advance.
Sorry
I,
about that.
I think it shows the current day when you view the events page. So you're like, oh, it's this day. There are like 2 dates on the events page on the Hi-Fi website. Maybe that's where that came from.
Cool. Well, since Will's not here, I'm gonna move to the next item. Um, Bill, this is another one of yours, audio monitor demo. Um, cool. You want to talk a little bit about this? Cool. Well, I think again, this sounds like a great project. Uh, so you know, go. Mm-hmm. Mm, mm-hmm. Well, this is great feedback. Uh, I'm gonna I'm gonna chat with the team a little bit about maybe I think maybe a good solution is, well, one, this notion that Tim has been promoting that I think is a good one of mm, you know uh, adjusting the plugin API. That one, the community could immediately make a PR for and begin that process, and we would be very supportive of it. The second thing, though, that I think, Bill, from your examples are really kind of touching on is if if you as a community would like us to make a new repo that is essentially independent of the main core code base, and that repo is focused on examples and example scripts, example tutorials, example plugins, um, then that might be that's a pretty straightforward thing for us to do. We could make a new repo that is, and we could start it out by not even having it in the build system. It just would be a place for you to submit your code to share with other people. Um, and so if is that sound like something that there's community support and energy around? Is should we
I
do that? It's pretty easy on our side, and that would give you, Bill, a place to kind of put these examples up for the public. If that's what you're asking for, then I think we could do that. All right, cool. Well, I'll take that as an action item then for us to do. Let's see. Um, Next on the list is Will put up a big comment about a bunch of different ideas around Ethereum, Uport, IPFS, um, and Philip broke that into smaller tasks. Um, Ashley, we might want to go and do some canny cleanup to make that more straightforward. Are you with me?
Yes, sounds good. I just have myself muted.
Uh-huh. Um, but it sounds like yeah, it sounds like Philip broke that into a couple different things. So I'm going to skip that one and go down to um, refactor edit.js to be so community can build on this. Both Philip and I have said yes, that sounds great. So I don't know if Raz is probably not here. Looks like Marcus, you upvoted this as well. Um, but yeah, this sounds like a cool project. Would love to have a developer submit
quick,
that.
quick question on that. One of the things that has kind of been a challenge for doing changes at that level is um, using custom default scripts in order to like load your own custom version of edit.js. Is that something you guys have given any thought to and might be receptive to some sort of strategy we might figure out for managing that?
Can you kind of put some more meat on the bone of that?
Sure. Like if I want to modify edit.js
Uh-huh.
and I can't just modify the one that's shipped with the app, or I could, but if I install again, it'll get overwritten.
Uh-huh.
So I might pull a copy down locally into a different folder and start to use that. But
Uh-huh.
now I have two edit buttons on my screen, one of
Uh-huh.
them dev, one not. So I'll usually transition to the one I'm working with. But if I have to reset my settings, I lose all that, and now I'm back to the stock. So some way of being able to opt into like an alternative edit.js that sticks, that's sticky across reinstalls kind of thing.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good idea too. It's the I guess the devil's in the details of how to present that to the user. But if you, for example, um, there is a command line option that you can pass to
Hmm.
interface that specifies an alternative directory for default scripts, and that'll for scripts, and then we'll load default scripts out of that. So that's a feature that exists today, but maybe wiring that up to some kind of a user interface that lets you um, kind of point to that directory and have it persist. That might be a way to do that. I think, yeah, that sounds like a cool project too.
Okay.
Would love to see that as a pull request. Um, cool. On to password-based domain access. George, this is, I think I just saw George here, right?
Yes, I'm here.
Hi, George.
Hi.
Thanks for
I
coming.
think I think that it's important to have a proper authentication implemented because companies will send invitation to new users that don't have yet a user on Hi-Fi, and they only know the email address and maybe a password that can be sent through these emails. An email, access also will be very nice to have, but it's difficult to implement because the server need to ask the metaverse based on the username if this is the email, but it's much complicated. But a password base is much easier to be implemented.
Yeah, so George, let me give some thoughts on that. So first of all, I think this is a great idea. Actually, if the domain server code is the code that's doing the authentication on the domain. Right now, it has support for really you could point it at any OAuth server inside the code. It's not currently a configuration setting in your settings file, but there is a code. There's like some C++ code that has a hard coded value that points to the OAuth server of the metaverse. If you, for example, today, if you had your own OAuth server that you were using, so for example, if you were using, if you were using sort of like a Windows or Linux based corporate authorization and credential server that supports OAuth, you could point to that line of code to that server, and that would become your user authority, and it would never touch Metaverse. So if you wanted to make a pull request that sort of put some more admin configuration on top of that idea, the place to do that is the domain server. And yeah, I think that's a great idea, a good example of an open source project that I think you're right, George. I think that would be a great feature to add to the domain server.
Yes. Okay.
Um, uh, cool. All right. I'm gonna leave a little comment on that.
Um, Brad,
Go ahead.
I'm not sure what the next one is, but I think it was Saracen or someone was asking if we could maybe discuss some other ideas that aren't on here. So maybe since there's
Sure.
six, maybe we should jump over to that given with the remaining time.
Yeah, totally.
I also have a proposal I'd like to at least discuss. It's not implemented, but afterwards.
Cool. Well, I definitely only have about 6 more minutes, and then I've got another
Um,
meeting I've got to get to. So,
okay, if I've
yeah,
got
go for it.
three of
Sure.
these things, I might as well take the one that's on my mind right now. One of the things that's really bothered me a lot is this persistent bug related to entity parenting. I think it only happens related to the avatars where you get this really ugly flickering thing. It's probably some kind of timing issue between the fact that the avatars and the entities are all handled on different systems. And since the old overlay system was deprecated in favor of making everything work on entities, you now notice this on stuff like tablets. If you move around fast enough, it'll sometimes desync. I don't know if it's really within my capability to fix that. It could be a really deep problem, but I guess there isn't really any way for me to access any information. Like, I can't find anyone even talking about this problem to get a handle on like why this might be. And this is something that's sort of been discussed about maybe the barrier between like some of the internal information that maybe might benefit from being public.
Hmm.
Just so that it would make it easier for like if anyone did want to step forward and fix some of these really outstanding obvious bugs that really probably need to be fixed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I hear you on that. The issue you're talking about is um, it is definitely in deep in the engine. It has to do with a handful of things that we are doing to try to support time boxing and um, the avatars and the entities get simulated and can be interrupted in between their simulation frames. And so if one gets slightly out of sync of the other, um, uh, I think that we would certainly, if an external developer uh, really dove down into that and felt comfortable with that, then uh, certainly we would value contribution from them and to do the code fix. Um, it's a good topic. We certainly are doing the best we can with the team we have to try to document the code and try to share stuff. I think that maybe Ashley, one thing we might want to consider is using one of these uh, meetings and like say maybe bring Sam and Samuel and a couple of the engine devs to a meeting like this and turn it into a kind of a brown bag code education session.
Mm-hmm.
So I that might be a way that we could help address that. I obviously Sarah and I agree that you know if there was written documentation that people could peruse on their own time, that'd be even better.
But even just like bug reports, like the fact you're sort of able to, it sounds like you had some explanation for why that was, about just a little bit of the nature of the timing issues, and just knowing little things like that would be a good starting point for anyone who wanted to fix like, some of
Yeah, and
these
I just am
issues.
saying, like, I think there's this balance between how much time we have to invest in writing out a bunch of documentation ahead of time, a priori, versus if, like, this is a great topic, and we certainly could get, I mean, I think it'd be straight. I mean, we're all very busy on a lot of different things, but maybe a simple way we could address this is to have that kind of a deep dive brown bag where we, instead of talking about ideas and pull requests, we just have a Q&A session on here's how the engine works and here's, at the C++ level, um, that we could invite a bunch of you community developers to that would kind of give you that foundation. And
I'll just throw two other quick things on and go into them. I'm looking also. I've already got a prototype for this, and this will require a C++ change. But I've also been working on proper stereoscopic mirrors, but
cool.
that would require a change to the
Awesome.
spectator camera to
Great.
just allow you to toggle that. So
Yeah,
hopefully that
that's
would.
another good example of something that I'd love for you to get some time to chat with Sam, our engine uh,
Mhm.
tech lead about. Uh, the secondary camera is is kind of something that
We want an API rewrite. I'm
yeah,
guessing.
we wrote the code real quick to do some simple things. By the way, I think actually Sam has a branch that he did that had stereoscopic mirrors as well in
Oh,
the and so he's done some work on that already. Uh, um, but we didn't ship it because it got deprioritized. But
hmm.
yeah, the more we talk about this, Ashley, I think um, I think it
Yeah,
would be
let's
really
talk about
great
how we
if
could do that.
like some
Yeah.
kind of a lunch and learn type thing, maybe
Mm-hmm.
maybe for the next one of these meetings. And I do just want to reiterate, we're definitely not trying to keep any of this secret in any way. It really just kind of comes down to um, our our ability to spend the time to do it. But we're believers in what you're saying, Terrence, and I think that um, um,
Time for one more very quick
sure.
thing. I don't know. Okay.
I don't know if someone
Th
else had something too, but
oh,
did a lot of
I
it?
want to make
do you
a
want to do you want to do it,
just.
Numa? Yeah.
I just wanted to gauge the interest in having subworlds, basically sort of a path system where a single domain server can host multiple worlds.
So today you can have a single you can have multiple place names in a single domain. Is that
Right,
what
but
you're
they
talking?
share a single coordinate system,
Mm-hmm.
and we all know like the limitations of the coordinates as they are currently in
Mm-hmm.
Hi-Fi might be a kind of requirement if you want to have big enough spaces to basically be able to teleport to different subworlds within one domain server.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't think that's a bad idea. I haven't thought about how that might be implemented. Whether you'd have multiple instances of the entities server running, or I think that
I'd
we.
like to keep it lightweight, so you could essentially have like, let's say you had a world with like 100 houses, you could basically have that all in one domain server. Having a separate instance of each entity server would be a big resource requirement potentially.
And so it would be as. So are you just saying like, uh, not that they'd actually still be in the same server, but the coordinate system for the entities would be
They would each have their own coordinate system, yes.
yeah. I mean, I don't think that's a bad idea. I just
My goal
I
is
I can't really wrap my head around how you would implement that. That sounds like a
yeah,
pretty big project.
it could be.
Um,
It would require also a change to the URL scheme potentially if you want to address these places. The reason I'm bringing it up though is because cost of running a server is a big issue, at least in the open community, and I think this would give some options for server operators to run more content with less overhead.
yeah, the only thing I'd say about that though is I run a server on my i7 desktop and my laptop, and I regularly have 20 people in that server hanging out, editing together.
What's your up speed there?
What's that?
What's your up speed?
You're talking about my bandwidth?
Yeah, bandwidth.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but that's my point, right? Is it's not about the compute of the
Yeah,
device.
yeah,
It's
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, my question is, could you run 100 in basically 100 different domains as they currently are on a single laptop without any extra overhead? Like if you were to run 100 different entity servers, for example, if you think that could be done, then maybe the overhead of running an entity server is low enough that you could just have them already running.
well, I mean, the headline is I think that that's an interesting idea that if you start to flesh out what that would mean, it
Of course.
may be a pretty big project, and it may if the goal is simply to have reduced server costs.
It's not just reduced server costs, it's lower administrative overhead. Like I don't have to ask the server operator to spin up a new entity server for me if I want to start a new, let's say a new world or something like that. I could just basically build on somebody's existing domain server new content.
Yeah. Like I said, sounds like an interesting idea, and I don't think we would be opposed to it if you kind of flesh that
Yeah.
out and
Okay. I just wanted to kind of
articulate that.
gauge your opinion on that.
Yeah.
I'll keep working on that.
I
Cool.
guess ultimately we want it to just be easier for people to spin up at some point too. So that may, I don't, if that's your primary driver, then
It could be. There are multiple ways, avenues to approach this problem.
yeah, for sure. Good thought. Cool. Dale, I know you have a question, but I also know that we're out of time. I don't know, Brad, do you have
Well,
time for one more question from Dale?
I'll be very quick about it.
Far away?
Okay. And you mentioned an idea that was deprioritized. I think it would be useful to us to have a list of such ideas that you're potentially interested in, but currently can't assign any time to. So maybe some of us could pick it up at some point.
That's a good thought. I think what we're hoping is that we want to know what people would like to focus on. Again, as far as like open source projects and what people here want to contribute to and work on. You know, as far as like stuff that we do in the future, I mean, we'll put stuff that's in release notes, but I think you'll see a pretty good indicator of. I think Philip has actually put a few ideas on the open source project as well, so that's another good place to look for things that we think are interesting. If I can just summarize the question, it was kind of like Dale feels it would be helpful if we had a list of things that we want to do at some point, but that we've prioritized. I don't know if an efficient way for us to really extrapolate that, but that was the gist. Right, Dale? Correct.
Yep.
I'm wrong.
Sorry, I was crashing. So
Was
there?
5 times in a row.
Yeah, I'm telling you, man, I'm super excited about our latest dev builds because it's way, way, way more stable. So hopefully we're getting forward to get that out.
Dale, I know that Brad has to go, but I think that's good feedback. Let us if there's anything we can do to improve that. But thanks for that thought and question. That's helpful. Cool.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, we will get the next one for next month on this week, so you guys can all save it and let others know, and we will post the video as well, and again encourage you guys to post ideas on the on the board, and we will do our best to, you know, please don't wait between now and the next meeting. We will do our best to answer any questions that you have. So.
Ashley, I wonder if we should maybe ask the folks now, or give us feedback if next time we do this meeting, if we try to use half of it to do some kind of a brown bag type thing. I don't know if that's going to have enough time, but anyway, I'm super open to that idea. So maybe that's the way we should handle it. Well, I think we're all open to. I think Ashley and I are both open to feedback about, you know, ways we can make this meeting more effective for everybody involved. We're certainly open to.
For the open source projects.
For the open source project in particular, exactly.
Yeah. Cool.
Cool. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
Thank you all for coming. See you next time.
Thank you. See you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, what did I miss?
No.
Unfortunately, I couldn't be here for the beginning.
In a week or two, they'll put up the video, I think, if it's about the same timing as before. No,
cool.
we just went over they went over the PRs that were in the system.